Hey everyone, welcome to this introduction to QuickTexture. We've just updated the add-on for Blender 3.1. Got a bunch of new features, so it's a great time to go and walk through every setting, talk about what QuickTexture is. If you're new to it, you don't have it yet. So basically, QuickTexture is for, as the name implies, quickly texturing your objects without having to go into the node editor. It exists somewhere between Substance Designer / Painter and just going into Megascans, applying one texture, and dealing with that process. So you kind of are able to put multiple different materials, blend them with masks, and then all of that is really fast because you're doing everything with hotkeys, you're doing everything with the viewport. So I'm going to show you how that's done. Let's get started. So here I have the preferences up. I just want to briefly touch on, there's a text size, color. This is just like basic UI stuff. You can turn on alt navigation if you use that. Really simple. This one is the only one that maybe you want to change. So basically when you're in QuickTexture and you are using one of the settings and you're moving your mouse, and that's how it like determines the value, which I'll show you that'll make sense later. But basically the work area is right here. So if you change the size, you might make it here. That's only useful if you have like you're not using a keyboard, you're using a tablet situation and you want access to this thing, but probably not recommended. I just wanted to mention that is there. You can go ahead and change some of the key maps if you would like. So you just go into key map, search for QuickTexture. So by default it's Control T, and in the end panel you'll see all of the hotkeys that I'll be covering, but these are the two that are customizable. This Control T QuickTexture and Quick Decal, which is Shift Control D. You can also change that to whatever you'd like. So we're going to start by looking at the simplest possible QuickTexture setup, which is, let's take a box. It does have UVs, but we're going to go down here, and this is the area that will make a difference before you press anything. So if you have Force Procedural UVs on, that means when you create a texture on this, it will remake the UVs. It will make its own procedural setup that we use, and it's useful for certain things. And I'm going to start by showing that one. So I'm going to have this on. I'm going to have this on box. Press Control T. That's going to bring up the menu. Let's just pick any texture. So I'm going to pick one texture. So what this has done is created a node setup. So it's created a node setup from that one image. So there was no normal map, there's no roughness. It derives all of that from that one diffuse texture that I selected. And you'll notice the UV map has been replaced. There's this modifier. The reason that this modifier is made is this Force Procedural UVs. So the cool thing about this is when you extend it, or when you extrude, when you work on the object, whatever you do to it, it's being retextured at all times. Like the triplanar is actually just being projected on the modifier level. So as you move it, the texture will move. If you want to freeze it at any point, you apply that modifier and now you're locked. So the next setup is we have the same box, it has the UVs, but now we're going to turn off procedural UVs. So now when we select the object, press Control T, select that same texture. We're going to get the same material applied, but now it's actually mapped onto the UVs. So when you try and do this, it's not going to work because it's using the object's UVs. So the third set of options here, instead of box, you can change it to view, and then you want procedural UV on for this. So then you can go to the view that you want, select a texture, and it will project it from the view. I'll go into like how to move it and all the settings later. I just want to talk about how these three settings are very important to understand before you've even pressed Control T to launch it, and how you're going to get different results. So in the previous examples, I selected one texture and let it make the roughness map, the bump, all from that diffuse. Now I'm going to show what happens if you go in here, and you can just select all of these. it basically looks at the name and derives where to put it based on that. And we support so many naming conventions, so you just select everything and it'll be fine, it'll handle it. So now we just wait for this to load. And now it's a more serious setup. It's got the normal map, it's got everything. Look inside here. It's got everything set up. It's using the non-color data. It's got its roughness. Everything is, it'll load in the AO map. Roughness, as I said, it creates all these hue, saturation, and contrast, which I'll cover later. But this is like the slower setup, the more involved, but still pretty fast, still very useful. This is probably the most common way to work, but then there is still that time that you just want one image, you just want to do it quickly, so you can derive the whole material from that one image. So I also want to mention that at any point you can change these images. So if you press Alt-R, you can go over here, go up, select a new wall, select them all, and it will place all of those images once it loads. And you can do the same for, like, if you're in bump map and you press Alt-R and select a new image, it will replace just that map. Okay, so we talked about the settings. Now it's a good time to talk about how to manipulate the transformations. So when you're in QuickTexture, you can go over here. So you see G will move, S will scale, R will rotate, all those things. You can Shift S to scale like this, which is really nice. Alt S, scale this way. Brackets will just do a 90-degree flip. So from this point, I'm gonna hide this node editor. There's no point of ever going in there anymore with this add-on. So at any point, by the way, when you close it with Control T, you can relaunch it again with Control T as long as you select it. So I'm gonna relaunch it. It's kind of hard to see the text because of this. Okay. So we're going to start by looking through the maps. So as I mentioned earlier, it makes all the different kind of maps and you can tweak all of them individually. So 1 is everything, 2 is going to be roughness. And you'll see that UI is always changing based on what you're looking at. So the map here is combined. You press 2, you're in roughness now. You have these settings here. You can press V, and now as your mouse moves, it'll change the value. Then you can left click to confirm or press the original hotkey. Press C, move left and right. You can go back to 1. Now you've got a new roughness. Press 3 to see the bump. Press 5 to see the alpha if you have it. Same with mask. So we'll get to those later when we have it. I'll get to the other ones later actually. I think I just wanted to mention the roughness. Let me show. Let's make this more obvious. Like the bricks, let's do actually an invert. So let's see here. Let's try and get this right. Okay. So the cracks, maybe there's like water in them, so they're shiny. So you can see right here. And we did all that without going into the node editor, without having to do anything. It's very easy and fast. And then we have these settings. We can turn on the metalness. We can make it emissive if we wanted to, change the AO strength. Here I'm pressing A and then moving it, cranking up the AO. Edit the bump. Same with the normal by pressing Shift N. Change the specular strength. And yeah, so, oh yeah, in the combined, I'll just cover these. You have the hue, value, contrast, saturation by pressing X. Just incredibly useful to be able to do all of those things without having to make any nodes at all. Yeah. And finally, last but not least, the last map that we need to cover is the tiling. So for this one, let's go make a plane. For textures, grass, I'm just going to select one image and let it make the whole material setup for me. And now, as you all know, when you scale it, you get this nasty kind of tiling. So if you go to 7, you can, so first you have to go to 7 and then you have to press U, which is the detiling map. It basically turns it on. It's just I made it a two-step process because it can get slow, and it's not something that you want on every material or every layer. So now that you have that, you can press H, V, get this, and now you've broken up the tiling. So you may have noticed in the 7 tiling map, there was another setting called triplanar. Let's show what that is. Take a sphere, smooth it. So when you have the procedural setup and you create a material, this procedural modifier setup does not do blending. So you have this seam. So just at any point you can go into 7, and that's kind of why when you press 7, it doesn't automatically do the detiling setup, because like I said, that's slow and you don't always want to do this. Sometimes you go into 7 just to do this triplanar blend. So you turn it on and it just removes the seam. It just does the standard box blending. So before we move on, let's circle back to the UV map. So the only real reason that the UV map exists is so you can make this Shift A UV smudge mask. We're skipping ahead here to masks, but kind of connected. So if you press Shift A, you're gonna get a new window to pop up. You can go select a mask, and this mask is a little different than all the other masks I'm going to show you that blend between material layers. This one actually is affecting the UVs. So if you press V to change the strength, you get this kind of like painterly effect. And this probably wasn't the best image choice, but it is kind of interesting. And it's just something that, you know, you can do. You get this kind of weird effect, especially if you maybe stretch it. Yeah, this is kind of cool. I wanted to just make another suggestion for the UV smudge mask. So when you're in UV and you press Shift A, it's actually a really good idea to use literal smudge maps. You can get these, you know, on ArtStation or Gumroad, and I think in the future we'll try and include these. But if you use this, you can actually get a really cool. So this looks really, really interesting. I think it's subtle, you know, with this off, then you just add a little bit. You get kind of this like Acviz painterly filter effect. So we spent a lot of time going over every setting, but we still haven't done the best part, which is taking one texture, loading it in, and then over here you can create a new layer. You can do a box mapping or a view. So this doesn't matter anymore. It's now based off this hotkey. Once it's for the second layer and above, you can make up to 5 layers, by the way. So let's press Ctrl B, make a new layer. Each one can be changed separately. I keep getting these issues because of the stream, or because of the recording. It's much faster when you don't record. But anyways, so when you press Q and W, you go between layers. What you can do now, best part is you press Control M. We'll cover all of these masks. So first, texture. Let's go over here. Let's select this. Now we're going to be in this mask map. So move it, do all the same stuff, value, contrast, and all that. And remember, if you press Tab, you're going to be previewing the final material while still having control over the active map. Wait for this to load. Yeah, this recording is making it a lot slower than it is. So it's very light, so let's just change this. Find the right settings. Yeah, so we can see how we've blended between the two textures really quickly. Haven't gone into any nodes. You can go in at any point, press 4 for the mask, and there it is. Right, white, it shows through. Boom. At any point we can press backspace to delete this mask, press Q and W to switch through the layers, and repeat that process as much as you would like. I wanted to quickly talk about taking a layer that you have, put it on texture, change the hue a little bit, lower the saturation, let's maybe go ahead and make it a little rough, darker, okay, shinier. So adding variation is always a massive priority, and a nice little shortcut, a cool thing that you can do, instead of going and adding a completely different texture and blending between them with a mask, you can go ahead and take this layer and just duplicate it by pressing Shift D. So now when you press Q and W, it's the same layer. But what you do, my computer is freezing again because of the stream. Okay, so you can go on layer 2, change the color a little bit. Let's make it darker. So now we got the same size. Everything's the same, except it's just a different color. And then you can go and press Control M, mask it, tab to see the final preview. And now once this loads, we should get some variation in color. Yeah, but without having to go and use a completely different texture. So both methods are very useful, but this is just a nice little thing that I noticed I was using a lot, so I wanted to make sure that I covered it. So just for good measure, let's go and repeat that process again without as much explaining, so it can be a little faster. So select the material, Control B. Let's do grass this time. So we're going to blend from the top to the bottom. It's always from, you know, layer 2 to layer 1 or layer 3 to layer 2. That makes sense. You blend down, press Control M, select a different roughness, scale it, move it around, go ahead and look at 1. Let's go back to 4, press tab so we can see what we're doing. This is cool. See that? You can go over to layer 1, change the scale, back to layer 2, change the scale, change the value. Look at that. So let's cover the other masks. So I'm going to go into material. I'm on layer 1. I'm going to make a new layer. Let's just use snow. This one. To load right here. Okay. It's loaded, yeah. I guess the snow is just white. Okay. So we're gonna mask by depth. We're gonna go to layer 2, press Alt H. So the way this one works is you want to select the displacement map of the first layer. You can see that here. Now let's go to 1, so find map. So this one's not to be confused by height. Height is going to be totally different. This is more the height map, which it doesn't really make sense for a trap. I guess from like for a ground it makes sense, you know. So it's not hitting the stuff that's deeper down. So that's why that's how you would use the depth map. For the height, that's like a more literal, like actual height. So let's just add a new layer. Let's snow. So now when we press Control H, mask by height, we've got this little mask preview. So when we press G, we're moving it up and down. We can tweak the value, which also moves it up and down. Contrast can work on the blend here, the smoothing, smooth it out. You can also, over here on the left, add some noise. This is going to be O. Let's do distortion. I guess you have to change the scale to Shift 8. Okay. So now when you press 1 to preview the final layer 2 material, okay. So now we're blending based on the height in terms of world space. It's compared to this, which was using the texture. And then another one, this one's very useful. Let's do it again, create snow. We're gonna mask by normal by pressing Control N. And that's just gonna be, it has all the same settings, but it's just for a little snow effect. Recording process. Okay, now you have snow on top, texture on bottom. So I showed you guys how to blend, if you have like 2 maps on this and you blend on the height, you can blend on all the different type of masks. But there's another way to do it where if you have 2 separate objects and you select both of them, you're gonna blend from this material onto this material when you press Control T. There we go. Now I've got this nice blend. It works with the same controls as the height mask, but it just saves you a little bit of time because you don't have to put that material on this one. You just take the existing materials and blend between them, and you still have all the smoothing, and already looks pretty good. One thing that's new to this version of QuickTexture is that you can put multiple materials on the same object based on the polygon selection. So I'll just set this up. So now if you close QuickTexture, you go into edit mode, you select this face, and then you press Control T. It'll bring up the menu. So now you have 2 materials here, as you can see. So if you want to switch between the materials, like right now you're on this one, if you press Control 1, it will go to the first one, Control 2, go to the second one. So in the case of having a pre-existing material, maybe you made it yourself or you imported it from Megascans or whatever the case may be, you have your own setup, it's not a QuickTexture. What you can do is select the object, press Control T, and it's gonna turn it into a QuickTexture. So it'll be using the same exact maps that were connected, but now you have all of the view saturation value controls and all that, and you can go right in and start editing in the viewport with the hotkeys. So now let's talk about copying materials and randomizing them. First, let me increase some of these settings here, add some normal, strength, add some AO, make it a little more rough, a little more shiny. Okay, so if you copy it over, that's fine. The materials are going to be linked. Put this editor. So you see the 2 thing here, they're linked. So if you change this, the other one will change. If you duplicate it, if you want to remove that link, you have to go in here. So none of the copying materials, none of the make unique thing, it's you're not able to do it manually. You don't click here. You have to use the tool that's included with QuickTexture. So let's do make material unique. So now when you change this, it is separate. These are still linked, but now this isn't. If you make a new box, so as I said, don't copy it over by doing this link materials thing. What you want to do is look over here, copy material. So you select the target object, and then you select the source. So depending on this button, it's gonna do what it says. If it'll unlink after the copy. So first, we'll just copy, and because it was checked, it will be unlinked. If you this, turn that off, target, source, copy, now these are linked. So for randomizing, I'm gonna delete all of these. I'm just gonna duplicate this a bunch of times. So these are all linked, they're the same. So if you go on any one of them and you go to the 8 map, this is the randomization mode. It adds a new node group inside here, but it handles all of that for you. So now that you're in 8 randomization, you can change these settings right here. So let's start with hue. Again, you press H and then you move the mouse. So hue, it's kind of a subtle, you don't want to do too much of that. Value is a really good one. A little light, I'm holding shift here so that I can just slightly move the value. Now I'm gonna do some roughness, which is awesome. A little more shiny, just add that variety. Saturation. And then this is just gonna change the seed a little bit if you're using hue. So yeah. So one feature that was heavily requested is the ability to bake the textures. So we have this stone material that we've been using, added some grass with this mask, just blended it together. And now let's say you want to either just make your scene work run a little faster, because if you have a lot of these, it can get crazy. Or you just want to take it to Unreal. You can go over here. So let's go to baking menu, change the name, set the location, textures, bake, the directory, change the resolution, change the samples, and it's smart enough to it'll set all of these back so you won't lose any of your actual settings. It's just going to use this for the baking process. Save original material means that this material will stay as is, and then you'll just have a new material that has the baking textures loaded in. So that's only useful if you want to like keep this around for a different object. But we are just gonna select the object, press bake textures. There's going to be a progress bar here. Just wait for it to finish. So now that the baking process has completed, it has loaded the textures in. And see here in the file browser, these are the ones you have. And that's about it. So another just cool thing that you can do is, just like we saw earlier when I remade the material for Megascans, this is now material that can be remade. So if you, for whatever reason, want to continue to edit it in QuickTexture style, and press Ctrl T. And now it's a QuickTexture again. That's pretty cool. And just one last thing to mention about this, depending on if you have a UV or not, you might want to turn this off when you're baking. So basically, if this is on, it will go in and do this Smart UV project, and then it will bake the texture from the procedural setup onto a Smart UV. And that's why we have a Smart UV map here. But if you are starting from an object that had UVs, you still use QuickTexture on it, and you want to keep those exact same UVs, you want to turn this off and then bake at that point. So when it comes to working with the alpha, there's a couple caveats with it. So when you're looking at, you press 5 and you're looking at the alpha map, it's just white, because basically this alpha map, whatever goes into alpha here, it's looking at the alpha channel. This doesn't have an alpha channel, so it's just the square of the image, which is easier to preview by pressing Alt C. Over here, Alt C. See, so it changes from clip to repeat. So now that's the image. And it's automatically masking. So you can't use this opacity thing because of just Blender issues to blend between layer 2 and layer 1. This is just kind of a global thing. If you go this opacity route, so that's why it's usually better to just use mask texture. But this still has some cool things, like if you go to 5, and so if you change this alpha toggle, press Alt A, it's now switched from the alpha, which it didn't have in this case, switched to the color. The color is really cool because you can edit this to have, so black is going to be transparent. Scale it up. Now when you're looking at this, so it's using itself as an alpha, and this can be cool for decals, and then it's probably better to use it as a decal actually and just do like that. So this is nice, and you can probably go in here and change the contrast so see it better. Yeah, so this is a cool thing to do, but most, 90% of the time you're just going to use the mask texture. One other thing I should cover really fast is if you have two layers, you can also use this layer mix amount, which is just gonna, once you press O and move the mouse, it's just gonna blend between the two layers, 0 to 1. So those are the kind of 3 different ways to blend things. But yeah, like I said, most of the time, press Control M, use some map. Doesn't really even matter what kind you can use. Change this up a little bit. Oh. Now, yeah, there we go. Let's change this a little bit to make it better. Go. See some grasses coming through here. Let's make it even more obvious. Press tab so we can preview it, which is always helpful. There we go. That's really cool. It actually works really well when you use the stone as a blending texture. That's interesting. So yeah. So this whole time we've been covering this Control-T QuickTexture. We haven't touched on Control-Shift-D Quick Decal yet. So the decals in QuickTexture in this version particularly are really cool. They're kind of built like Unreal Engine, so they're actually a mesh that's movable. And let's just start by showing you here. Select the object, press Control-Shift-D, you'll get the pop-up. Go to our texture folder, and let's just choose something. So now you see an image got brought up, and this is actually a piece of geometry, but it's reprojecting at every time. Basically, it's just constantly reprojecting because it's using a decal node, geometry node setup. So you can change the resolution here, and I'll show you, that'll make more sense on the sphere. The displace is useful because sometimes you just need to get it off the surface a little bit. So you can rotate it and see it automatically deletes the geometry. So this is what's really, really cool. And I haven't seen any add-ons in Blender that are working this way for decals yet. This is really nice. And it's important to keep in mind, or it's important to know that if you go in edit mode, you can actually see the geometry and where it's being projected from. So you can duplicate it. So it's Shift D, like regular Blender stuff, rotate it. And another thing that's really nice is that this is actually a quick texture. So you press Control T, you have all of these settings. You can add new layers, although I'm not really sure why you'd want to do that, but it's there. But what you can do is change the value, the contrast, the saturation. And these are both currently linked right now, so let's just go ahead and unlink it. Make material unique. So now, as we change this, it does not get affected, or this one doesn't get affected. So let's do this. Okay, so now the most useful setting probably with this, besides, you can also go into roughness and all that. Make this more rough, make it really shiny. Interesting. You can go into alpha. And now by default, this is going to be using the alpha channel. So you might want to switch it to the diffuse if you don't have an alpha channel, but usually decals that you download online have it. So what you can do here is press V. Let's go into tab so that we can see the preview here. So you can blend the opacity. So look at how cool that is. And let's just go ahead and delete this one. I think decals, mostly you want to use them with lower opacity. It depends. Because if you want to use like a logo or something, then you do want full opacity. But for something like this, add a little variety, add a little texture. It's really, really nice. And then at any time, again, go and make it brighter. That's really cool. So then also the other use case, let's select an object. Let's press Control-Shift-D. Let's just take a logo, scale it. See, even though it's a sphere, it's still being projected real time, and you can move it off. So this is really, really cool. So in this case, you do want full opacity. Then you can duplicate it, scale it, rotate it around. That is the mesh decal. So before I wrap this video up, the last thing I wanted to show was photo modeling. So if you have nothing selected, when you press Control T, it'll still bring up this file browser. You can select an image to use as a reference. You can see it brings it in with proper scale and everything set up. And this is a texture, but it's designed kind of, it can be used as a reference, like especially if you'll notice when you're moving it, the texture moves through it. If you apply that modifier, you can use it as a reference. But the real thing that you do with this is photo modeling. So if you go in here and you go in edit mode and you say start cutting, cut in another face here. So you can, for example, extrude this and you see it projects this texture on. If you don't want that and you just want it to project from view, you can just set this before you press Control T, but it doesn't really matter. So that's just with the knife tool. I'm not gonna actually use the knife tool. It's way too slow to do that. As you'll notice, like I had to carefully like select all this, and there's all the, can't really draw with it. It's kind of annoying. So I'm just gonna show you how I would do this with Quick Shape and Quick Curve. So for this part of the video, I just recorded a little time lapse in Quick Shape doing this photo modeling of this Moorish door. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for watching. I know this video was kind of dry and just like putting a texture on a box over and over and explaining what every setting does, but it sounded like that's what you guys wanted from the YouTube comments. If you check my channel, there's other videos, some that are a little more advanced, some where I kind of just do a time lapse of me putting a whole scene together, and I'll be doing more tutorials that are in this style for Quick Shape and our upcoming add-ons, Quick Assembly, Quick Sculpt, and then also doing more concept type of major scene in a project tutorial. So yeah, just stay tuned. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, what do you guys want to see, and thank you.